Well, thanks very much. My name is Neil McLeod. I'm Director of Sales Engineering at a company called Digital Shadows. We're one of the leading providers of digital risk protection or digital risk management in the world. And it fits very well into what Alex is talking about. I'd just like to iterate, Alex, thanks, great chat. And MISP is a fantastic tool. As Alex says, it's one that you should really be looking at. We do a lot of work with things like Shodan. We do a lot of work on code repositories as well. So all the tools that you went through today, very interesting, Alex. But the main thing that you spoke about a couple of times was the attacker's view. And that's what I'm really interested in as a digital risk platform company, is I take information about a company and then I look for that information out on the public internet, across the surface web, deep web, dark web, across technical repositories, code repositories, and anything that an organization is leaking out to the internet, I want to be able to tell them about. Right, my talk today is going to be focused on initial access brokers, a very specific type of cyber criminal. I'll talk about what they do. We'll come up with some of the stats around initial access brokers and the listings we see from them. The work that initial access brokers do ties very well into ransomware. And I know this is a problem that everyone across the world is worried about. And it doesn't matter if you're a large company or a small company. It doesn't matter the size of your profile. Everybody effectively is at risk from ransomware. We'll look at a number of the common attack vectors. So how are people getting onto your systems to actually start encrypting it or exfiltrate data to launch that ransomware attack against you? And we'll look at some of the mitigations. Here are some of the things you can do to protect your organization against the threat of ransomware. And while we're doing this, I'll be bouncing from my PowerPoint slide deck into my platform, Digital Shadows. And actually, I'll be showing you a couple of things in Shodan as well. Alex, I might have to have a look at that netlist in a bit more detail. Before I start, briefly about ourselves. Like I said, leaders in digital risk protection. We've been around now for just over 10 years, founded in 2011 in London. Offices around the world. We focus on bringing customers into our model and keeping them safe, checking what people can see about them from the outside, that attacker's view of their company. Right, let me kick off straight away. And as before, please just fire questions through in the chat if you have them, and I'll stop at regular basis for that. So first of all, let's start off by talking about IABs, or initial access brokers. First thing is they're really a critical part of the cyber criminal underground. And what these are very, very technical people, sometimes script kiddies, sometimes people who get lucky. But effectively, what they're trying to do is find a way onto your network. Okay, they're trying to look for exposed resources from your company. Once they find that, they're trying to get onto that network, see if they can establish persistence there, see if there's any possibility of lateral movement. But what IABs, initial access brokers, typically do at that point is they try and monetize what they've got. So they'll try and sell that access on to someone else. And that someone else may be a ransomware gang who is untechnical, who might just be buying a ransomware toolkit and is looking for victims. So initial access brokers in many cases do the work of actually gaining a foothold into your network, and then they immediately monetize that by passing that off to somebody else. So they attempt to gain access to vulnerable networks. Reconnaissance usually begins by using scanning tools, like Shodan, like Netless. These are great tools to find those initial weak resources that we have out in the network. 2021, we saw an enormous increase in the number of listings from initial access brokers. We're seeing remote working everywhere. I know we've had that in the UK. It's just stopping at the moment. I know that Israel was pretty locked down at one stage. So remote working, everybody having to get into corporate resources from their home machines, from the public internet, from a VPN, etc. And we've seen an incredibly successful ransomware monetization model. Ransomware gangs are making good money out of ransomware this year. Now, what's actually happening in the background? If you're familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, we've got something up here called initial access. This is, we've got 9 techniques, and under initial access, we're looking at external remote services. This is really what the players here are trying to exploit. I've got a couple of links throughout this presentation. So if we didn't know what T1133 was, I can click on that and I can just open that in the context of my Digital Shadows Searchlight portal. And that'll give me a lot more information around that specific TTP. It'll give me a lot more information around this from an incredible list of tactics and techniques we hold within the platform. I'm going to bounce back and forwards a bit between the presentation and Searchlight. But effectively, we're looking at leveraging external facing infrastructure here. The increase in listings, we've been tracking this since our company began. And if you have a look at the numbers of listings over the years, they have increased dramatically up to 2020 on this slide. I was hoping to have the new report on initial access brokers out with all our brand new statistics, but that's going to be out in about 2 weeks' time. Watch our website. We've got some really good reports coming out, and we've got a new one looking back at 2021 with initial access brokers coming soon. There's some sneak previews. We're seeing about a 58% increase in 2021. So the increase in listings is quite dramatic. What does a listing look like? Well, here's a typical listing picked up from one of the undergrad forums that we're monitoring that our researchers possibly have access to. Someone will post an advert saying, hey, I've got access through to, in this case, I've got web shell access through to a bank in Chile. It's for sale for $6,000 US. I might be negotiable, etc. Here's how to contact me on XMPP or on my Proton Mail account. So that would be a typical advert. It's quite blatant. What we don't see anymore is the names of the companies very often. So you see up here, we've got bank name redacted. People who are doing this, initial access brokers, don't typically put the name of the bank up there. They'll give you some hints around it. It's the largest bank in Chile in this case. But they're not going to say, hey, I've just hacked into Bank Nacional in Chile, because then that bank will be alerted and will take action against it. We also see things like adverts for access. And here's somebody looking for access. It's like initial access wanted. This threat actor out here called Stallman is saying, hey, if anyone's got access to American hospitals or American infrastructure, medical equipment, around the US, but sort of English-speaking countries, mainly in the EU, let me know, I'll buy it from you. And there's actually a comment down here. If you think about the eBay or similar rating systems, the way that initial access brokers build up their reputation is by doing a series of good sales and getting good feedback from their customers. And in this case, Stallman's got a comment coming through from BC Monster saying, I can vouch for him. He pays. He's a good buyer. Here's another one with access for sale. A threat actor called Drummerlu. We see him quite often out there, but here's an advert for selling access through in UAE and Middle East. Again, he gives some rough information about the company. The first one's the UAE. It's an insurance space, domain administration. Very interesting. They have revenue here as well. Why do you think they have revenue? Well, there's two things. It gives me an idea of the size of the company he's got access to. 800 million revenue is pretty good. But it also gives me an idea of how much I could actually charge. If I launched a ransomware attack against that company successfully, if they've got 800 million, that's a pretty big target. Let's just have a look. I said something about old Drumaloo's, quite famous. We come across him quite a lot. If I just climb into my platform again and put in his name as a search, I can come up with a threat actor profile on him. I can come up with a number of intelligence updates every time we've seen him put something up for sale. And I can actually look at, the raw forum posts that we've been gathering. Here's a selection of adverts that he's put through on a regular basis. So things in China, things in Italy, we've got a good idea of how active he is. And if we went through to his threat actor profile, we would have a bit of a write-up on him, but we would always see, as again, how prolific he is, how often we've come up against him. And what we're doing is we're tracking actors like this. An initial access broker is selling on the dark web. We're not just tracking those enormous APT groups that you read about all the time. We track lower level actors as well. Just some more of the 2021 statistics out there. The top sort of sectors that are being hit are retail, technology, and financial services. The most targeted access, I'm going to speak about this in a little more detail. RDP, VPNs, VPN RDP. Targeted countries, we don't see Israel on the top 10, on the top 5 list there. And the most expensive countries for access as well. Interestingly, Iran up there, and number 3, and the UAE in number 5 at the moment. So let's have a chat about those access types. How do people get onto your network? What do they want to exploit? How do they want to gain access? So if we looked at this graphic, this was from our 2020 report, soon to be updated in our 2021, but we don't expect to see much difference on it. RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol from Microsoft, is the listing we see the most of, and it's also the most expensive listing. So RDP is great for getting full access onto machines, and this is probably why it is so expensive. We see a lot of other access through for things like domain administration accounts, VPNs. Citrix is very, very important, popular as an attack methodology. Control panels, not a very high price for those. You typically see these as CC panel, this is how I control my web page. Content management systems and shells. So definitely the most important one from a price and a volume of listings is RDP. Now, Alex showed us how Netlist.io worked, but I still use Shodan. And actually our platform, the Searchlight platform I'm showing you, uses Shodan in the background. So we do a lot of work in the background that Alex was showing us, where we go off and we scan infrastructure for vulnerabilities. We scan infrastructure for bad certificates or open ports or things like that. And we effectively bring that all through as a single alert in Searchlight. Anyway, if you have a look, I did a quick scan on Shodan, just a scan for port 3389, that's RDP. And I looked for the country code of IL, so Israel. The first one I found was vulnerable. It picked up a vulnerability. So Shodan picks it up, and it also tells me it's vulnerable to CVE 2019-0708. Okay. Interestingly, it's a Windows XP box. It's in Hebrew. So it's a really old box, and it's out in Beersheba. What I know about Beersheba is that I wouldn't try hacking that. This might just be a honeypot. I don't know. Anyway, if we have a look at that vulnerability, if we weren't familiar with that, I can just take that, click on that vulnerability, and again, open this up within Digital Shadows. We've got a new vulnerability intelligence module built into the platform. And actually, oh yeah, I should have recognized that. That's the Bluekeep vulnerability. Incredibly high, incredibly easily exploitable. And that old XP box sitting out there in Beersheba is actually vulnerable to Bluekeep. So here's a lot of information around the CVSS score, 9.8 out of 10. the exploits that we know about, the targeted fixes, advisories, all this sort of information around every sort of vulnerability is held within our platform. So we just had a look. That was a quick, scan through to something in Israel. If I just go across the live showdown link, though, let me do that. What else always interests me, and I'm just doing a scan for port 3389 again. I'm looking at the states because I've got more systems out there. But what always interests me is the number of companies that have RDP boxes with their company names on them. So this is running on a standard port. I now know that this box is a 2012 revision 2, release 2. It's owned by the Walnut Hill Group. Let's scroll down a bit more. Enterprise Network Solutions. You see, there's just so many people that actually, the Shams Group, there's so many people that advertise their company name in there as a legal notice. But what this gives me as an attacker is the ability to scan infrastructure, find OpenRDP servers, and then if they give me the company name, that's fantastic, because I can now start doing a bit more research then, maybe launch a phishing attack against them looking for credentials, or maybe just go through my database of previously exposed credentials and see if anything is available there. That was actually the attack method used against one of the large US ransomware attacks recently, Colonial Pipeline. An exposed RDP server was found. Nobody knew about it. It didn't have two-factor authentication switched on. And somebody effectively went mining through a list of exposed credentials from that company until they found one that worked. And that was a $4.5 million ransomware demand there. So this is just a simple way of using Showdown that I can look for exposed resources out there on the internet. I had to show you this one. This is just a scan I did the other day of RDP servers in Russia. Now, interestingly enough, this box, when you log in, you don't get its normal legal message. We'll just go across to it in Showdown. And look at this. It's actually already been hit by Redeemer ransomware. So the message I get when I connect up to port 3389 on this box in Russia is Redeemer ransomware. Your data is encrypted. Let me just zoom in a bit, Right, what happens next? Contact us for a decryption key. We accept payments in Monero, etc. So I just found that quite amusing. The box in Russia hit by ransomware. And again, I just had a look in Shadow Search and said, right, so let's have a quick look for Redeemer ransomware. And this is, it's free to use ransomware. Low fee, low licensing fee, C++ written ransomware, blah, blah, blah. Here's where you get it. So ideally, think about this. I can buy access to corporate networks from an initial access broker. And then I can start using Redeemer ransomware, which is free initially, to start launching ransomware attacks. It's pretty straightforward for me to do. And unfortunately, this could just be a test system, seeing as it's based in Russia. Unfortunately, maybe somebody hit that box. A lot of the work that we do with Showdown and with tools like Netless, I said that we actually do within the Digital Shadows platform for you. And if I can just show you this screenshot here, this is what we've been doing in the background for a customer. They've given us a list of IP addresses. They've given us other assets like their domains, their social media handles, their GitHub repositories, their VIP names. And we take all of this information into our platform and continuously monitor for it. The screenshot here just shows some alerts that have come up. So a customer has given us a range of IP addresses. We've done a number of scans and we're picking up various CVEs on those. We're picking up things like certificate errors. We're picking up exposed ports. All of the same sort of information that you can pick up from a Showdown or from a Netless. But again, what we do is we bring it all into a single platform with a single interface. and alerts that can be generated from there. Just have a quick look at the Middle East in a little more detail when we talk about ransomware. Here's the top countries we see targeted. Israel way down there at the bottom. These are posts, not ransomware attacks, but this was targeted in the Middle East. We can see Saudi Arabia pretty much up there, Israel fairly down low. The sort of prices people are paying for access across the Middle East. You see Turkey actually gathers the highest prices, interestingly enough, followed by Egypt, Middle East in general. Israel down there at $540 for an average initial access broker listing. And the types of industries that are targeted in general, we see these pretty much the same all across the world. Telecommunications, financial services, healthcare, technology, government. So let's talk quickly about ransomware. I'm just going to mention things like the ransomware gangs are typically getting access through from initial access brokers. The ransomware gangs themselves are fairly indiscriminate. You know, we've seen some very high profile cases against things like Colonial Pipeline in the States, JS Meats in the States. I think actually one of those had a state of emergency declared. And it just goes to show you, if you really want to annoy the Americans, go after their oil and gas and go after their meat. But anyway, places like the meat processing company, that was a $10 million ransom from that. Bitcoin records show that DarkSide, one of the ransomware gangs, has made over $90 million in a matter of months. It's quite incredible. Israel definitely hasn't been spared ransomware attacks. There was a number of very high-profile ones there: KLS, Sherbet, VeriSign, H&M. There's been a number of attacks in Israel. I think what we noticed there, though, is that very often in Israel, there's not a requirement for a ransom. You know, that was Sherbet. We talked about H&M as well. There was a series of attacks that hit you recently. But I think very often that we see that the boundary between financial gain and activism is quite blurred. So a ransomware attack might be launched, but it's more to embarrass somebody rather than for financial gain. This graphic here just talks about the ransomware activities by gangs, so which gangs have been the most prolific. We're talking about Q4 2021. You know, the obvious one missing out there is Revil, but Lockbit is pretty much dominant in Q4. And again, we've just got a great report out talking about ransomware in Q4. It's available on our website. I'd encourage you to have a look and download the links there. Targeted geographies, again in Q4. This is all available on the online report. Once again, sectors, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but pretty much the same sectors we see month after month, targeted across Q4 in 2021. Like I said, when we're talking about Israel, and I speak about places like KLS and Sherbet, you know, we're seeing a lot of attacks that are launched, but there's not, the ransomware gang doesn't have that aim to make a financial return. And we see this very often if you have a look at activists like Moses Stuff. So here's their website up at the moment. They actually have a surface website, mosesstuff.se, where you can go onto, and they sort of launch attacks against a number of Israeli companies, particularly for political reasons and for hacktivism. And if we click on back here, we can go across to our Searchlight area, and we can see what we've just been tracking. So we release intelligence updates every time we're aware of something, and just filtering by a country code of Israel on my site. This gives us a lot of information about the types of attacks that have been hitting you recently. So a lot of really good information, that is related to your region in particular. I'm not going to go through these in detail, But what this is just within Searchlight, I also have the ability to do random, almost free text searches across the data that we hold. And I have a search string I really like using, looking for sales from initial access brokers. Look across the deep and dark web forums and look for people selling things like databases or access or anything like that. And I can limit that by using the word Israel in it. And again, just bringing up that link will bring me up all the different adverts or all the different offerings I've got across forums for people selling things and selling access into Israel. A lot of these at the top seem to be related to, I think this was Raphael and the CCTV hack recently, but a lot of others go back to, what was this? Domain access into a cybersecurity company in Israel. These are all the sort of listings I have up and I'm aware of at the moment. Right, I'm just going to talk about mitigations briefly and then leave a couple of minutes for a Q&A at the end. But anyway, the main thing that you need to do is we need to be aware of what our externally facing infrastructure looks like. If we can prevent initial access brokers from gaining access in the first place, we're in a good place. Know what they're targeting, defend yourself. Monitor for leaked credentials. Make sure that you're doing this. Monitor for leaked credentials. People dismiss leaked credentials as something as noise, but it isn't. Monitor listings to determine who their victims are. Are they in the same sector as you? Are they in the same geography? And low-hanging fruit, the easy people to hit are targeted by initial access brokers. If you just make yourself a little more difficult to hit than your neighbor, you would be better. The idea of having, if I lock my windows, if I have a good lock on my front door, a criminal might go next door. It's the same sort of thing with initial access brokers. We're going to be sharing out these slides, so I'm not going to go through these in detail given the time we're at, but we've got a number of points around how to secure the typical attack vectors. So RDP, for example, here's the things we should be doing if we have to have RDP in our organization. Don't allow connections over the open internet. Use a VPN first. Use network level authentication. Use two-factor authentication. Use IP whitelisting, strong passwords, lock out IP addresses. A number of things that are probably fairly simple to do and fairly general knowledge, but we don't see people doing them. So we've got a list of mitigations for RDP, same sort of things as VPN, use two-factor authentication, make sure that you've got secure passwords set up, make sure that you've got some sort of zero trust policy there. And finally, some hints here for securing Citrix infrastructure, operating system, and ensure patches are applied, encrypt sensitive traffic flows, etc. Deep and dark web, finally, monitor listings out there. Have a look at the deep and dark web and just see who's out there, who's been buying and selling, what industries are targeting, see what the trends are at the moment. Monitor credentials and make sure if your organization's credentials appear in a data dump, we can check to see if they're valid. So I'm just going to wrap up now with conclusions. IABs are incredibly important in the cyber criminal supply chain. RDP access accounts for 70 to 80% of access. If you have RDP access to your network, be careful. Access is sold to the highest bidder, whether it be nation state or criminal, or in Israel's case, hacktivism or activism. Protect yourself and make yourself a difficult target, know your attack surface, and use a digital risk protection platform like Digital Shadow Searchlight. And I'll just say again in closing, spend some time on our website. There's some great data out there and some great data around initial access brokers and ransomware. And I'm going to wrap up there. Sorry, I haven't left the 5 minutes for questions, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to squeeze those in.
As for now, we don't see any open questions.
All right, brilliant. In that case, I'll say thank you very much. Have a brilliant rest of the day from my side.